Welcome to the Fire Life Podcast CT. The stories and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely the individuals speaking. The hosts, firefighters, fire buffs, and sparks do not represent any fire department or organization. Stand by for fire talk.
Welcome back to the Fire Life Podcast. I am your host, Matt Cohen, with my co-host today, Eric.
I'm still in from the bullpen.
And our special guest, Wayne Miller, retired ATF agent from Boston, Massachusetts. Wayne, thank you for coming on.
Guys, thanks for having me on this ice-cold, snowy day.
Yes. New England weather.
Yeah, thanks for committing for the drive down here. Mass Pike is never fun.
No.
So, Wayne, let's talk about how you got into the ATF. And I assume you were a police officer before that, or?
Well, it was a strange path. I started out at the University of Connecticut in engineering my freshman year, and I did not like it. I played hockey. I played for them, but I had mono my first year, and I struggled through engineering. And halfway through the year, I don't know if it was Serpico or Dirty Harry or something, but I ended up wanting to get into law enforcement. So I ended up going to Bryant College, which is now Bryant University. They had criminal justice, and I did well. I loved the program. I loved everything about it. And then there was a winter session, you know, those jam-packed course that you do in 3 weeks or something where you go every day. Well, I raised my hand. It was a drug narcotics course. I raised my hand, and the instructor, Charlie Akadorian, was the head of the Rhode Island Division Drug Control. And he said, "Can I talk to you after class?" He ended up hiring me to do undercover work while I was a student, but not at Bryant, around the state of Rhode Island. And then I worked the summer for them also doing undercover work. And because of that, that got me to Dennis PD as a summer cop. When I graduated from Bryant, I didn't have a job a real job yet, but I was undercover down on Cape Cod. I went to the station twice the entire summer, and I worked the beaches, softball team, the bars, stuff like that, buying drugs and stuff. And that all helped me when I finally got an interview with ATF. And that was April of 76. I got on the first day of June 1976, first day of summer, June 21. And they hired 40 agents for the Boston division, which is all of New England. And over the next 25 years, they only hired 40.
Oh, wow.
So that fortunate piece of life that I managed to get in 1976. And they had a concentrated urban enforcement CUE. That's why they hired so many, because we were working gun cases on the streets, getting guns off the street type of thing. So that's what I was doing first. Working undercover cases, doing some silly, crazy things that shouldn't have been done. And I worked guns for almost my first 4 years. Had detective friends of mine. You develop relationships, you know.
Yeah.
And these detectives, there was a small fire in a house in Walpole, Massachusetts. And the fire department had to force entry in the garage where smoke was. It was a raised ranch, the garage underneath, and smoke coming out of the garage. When they forced entry, nobody was home. And they uncovered a barrel with 17 guns in it, and they called the police. There ended up being 46 M16s, stolen M16s from an armory.
Wow.
In there. And the detectives called me instead of the state police, who they're supposed to call, because of my relationship. As a matter of fact, that detective introduced me to my first wife. And I never held it against him when we got divorced, many years later. But that's how law enforcement works. You develop relationships, you know. So I realized after a few years, though, that I wasn't going to be fulfilled doing that type of work. when ATF got serious about doing arson cases, which was around 1980-ish, I went to my first fire scene. I went to the National Fire Academy, went to the State Fire Academy, and ATF started an arson group in 1982, which I volunteered for. And because every fire case is a puzzle, and you interview people don't realize how important interviews can be. But you interview anything from a first eyewitness, could be a homeless person, a cabbie who discovers a fire, the first police officer on scene, the first firefighters on scene, the business owner or property owners, occupants, competitors, all sorts of disgruntled people. You know, it's a lot to it. And you also have the fire scene, which a couple years later I became a certified fire investigator. And I concentrated with that the rest of my career. And at the fire scene, you know, again, it's a puzzle. Trying to figure out where it started and then what caused it. And so you put that together, and there's so much to learn. With ATF, I probably had 1,000 hours of training, and then I did almost 18 years on the private side after I left ATF. And I have over 3,000 hours of training.
Wow.
And folks, my confession, you can't arrest me because you need corroborating evidence, but I have personally set 100 fires, training fires.
Yes.
And I've done it all. I've had the equipment on, I've been inside, watched it develop until it becomes close to being untenuous, and back out, and we've computerized them. We did ATF, the federal government did the right thing for once, and they spent money properly, and they trained us really well. So that's how I got into the fire business.
Wow.
Long answer.
Yeah. Any family previously in the police or fire?
Not directly. I grew up in Rhode Island, and my family's scattered. I have a brother and two sisters, and but I'm now married 30 years plus to my second wife, and her father was a captain just north of Boston in the city, and her brother was also a captain there, and coincidentally, Joyce lived through a night in East Boston. We have a lot of three-deckers. Firefighter friend of mine, if you read Burn, Boston, Burn, you see three-decker, triple-decker, three-decker, because I didn't want to use the same term every time. But Jimmy Flaherty, who's passed away, who was a member of Boston Sparks, he said, "Wayne, don't say triple-decker. That's a sandwich. Stick with the three-decker." So Joyce lived in a three-decker, and 4 of them burned down. Hers was the second one that night. And my stepson, Jason, was 5 at the time. And she had to come from the 3rd floor down in the dark. And so what's strange about it, we met at a singles place. And she ends up with a fire investigator. So her father, brother, and her experience with fire, and then she ends up with me.
Sometimes things just have a way of working themselves out.
Yes, they do.
And you talked about, I mean, you were having that relationship with the police officer who introduced you to the first wife kind of thing. I mean, it's all a connection with the fire service, police, all that. I mean, just, I was talking on the last podcast about, like, how much my friends got me through my divorce, and a lot of them were firefighters, and, like, calling Eric the other day saying, "Hey, Palmer's going to be sick." He is sick. So, you think you can help me out? I mean, one time you need me. Like, I'll help you set up, do whatever you want. And he was here. You know, it's great to have friends to just help out, drop of a hat. It's great.
You know, I always lived in Norfolk County, which is sort of the southwest, almost, it goes right down to Rhode Island. I live in Franklin, Mass. now, which just goes right down to almost the Woonsocket border almost. And Norfolk County, I had friends in Canton, Mass., Walpole, Westwood, and the state fire marshal who lived in that area too. We used to go to a place called Doc and Nellie's. That was a Patriots place. That was I can't even remember the names now that I have to. But it was a bar. We used to go together and watch Monday Night Football and stuff like that, and we all hung out. They invited me to all fires in their towns, no matter what the fire was. So I got to see more at that point. I now have 2,300 fire and explosions I've been to. And I know that's for real. I know a lot of people guess or estimate. ATF mandated that we keep track. So I wrote down each one, and then on the private side, I continued that. I have one of those big desk blotters, calendars, every single case number, what town, and the owner's name, and I counted them up. So about 2,300.
Wow.
Wow. What year does that go back to when you first started with the ATF, starting the recording?
The first time I wrote it down was 1980, and 2019 was my last fire that I've been to.
Wow.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. So, once you said they formed the Boston office,
Arson group.
Arson Group, Arson
Yep.
Investigators, and then there was. Can you talk about getting into the arsonists that were some Boston Sparks police officers, and talk about how that all started?
I can tell you all about it. So it's really a coincidence that the ATF Arson Task Force was formed first week of March 1982. Unbeknownst to us and unbeknownst to them at the same time, because they didn't know we existed yet, this group of 8, it ended up being 8 arsonists and the 9th guy joined the conspiracy. But there was a tax cutting measure in Massachusetts called Proposition 2.5. And that got voted in by the citizens of Massachusetts. And November 4th, 1980, the same day Ronald Reagan got voted in, the same day Greg Bemis, one of the arsonists, turned 20 years old. Okay? What happened with that, it's very simple in the sense that it gets more complicated, but to make it simple, if you own a $100,000 piece of property, it can only be taxed at $2,500. And we have a lot of older cities and towns. And back then, Boston wasn't any place near as expensive as it is now, and there were a lot of vacant, abandoned, empty properties. And they weren't worth anything. So the tax base was going to lower because of this measure, Prop 2.5. And it was going to cause layoffs of who's the usual suspects in the sense of the layoffs. It's teachers, police, firefighters, maybe some DPW, right? So, well, Boston Fire, just to give you an example, had 1,700 firefighters altogether until Prop 2.5 went fully into effect. They lost 600 firefighter positions.
Wow.
That's 38%, something like that. And 22 firehouses closed. That's a ton.
Yeah.
I mean, Manchester probably has 2 firehouses,
Not too sure.
3 maybe. But, yeah, if you take 1 or 2 away, stuff like that, it really hurts. And you go from how many guys, 4 or 5 guys on an apparatus down to 3 on an apparatus, you know? And guys were getting hurt regularly, so you're losing more people. Guys were busy. So they set their first fire in February 1982, about 2 weeks before we formed our arson group. And the main guys were Boston Sparks. They were Sparks. And people don't, to give you a quick definition, it's people who collect memorabilia. It's like hobbyists. They're like sports enthusiasts, except they like things related to fire. And some of them run to fires. In Boston back in that day, because late 70s Boston had enough fires already, so people were sparking fires. That means chasing fires, running them. So Greg Bemis, Ray Norton was a full-time Boston firefighter. He was a buff also. Donald Stackpole always had wanted to be a firefighter when he was young, but he couldn't because of physical, and he had a criminal record and stuff like that. Robert Grabowski was a full-time Boston cop, and he always wanted to be a firefighter. And then Lenny Kendall was Greg's best friend. So they were initial 5, and Wayne Sandin was a lieutenant in the Boston Housing Police. They got him joined in, and they started setting fires because they said if we could get the people pissed off enough to raise hell with the commissioner, they wanted the press to pick it all up, the media. And the commissioner and the mayor of Boston back then was Kevin White, put pressure on them to rehire people. So I called it a twisted version of Robin Hood. Instead of stealing from the rich, give to the poor.
Yeah.
Let's set enough fires so our brothers and sisters can get back on the job, type of thing. And that's how it evolved, and that's what their goal was initially. I can keep going if you want.
Yeah.
They picked up, they did the first fire, and, they're scared doing the first building fire because they did dumpsters, about 100 dumpsters first. That didn't get anything, any attention. So they said the only way is if we burn buildings. So they targeted abandoned, unoccupied buildings, figuring we're not going to hurt civilians, and the firefighters probably won't have to go inside. Well, they did 1, and they do 2 a night, then they do 3 a night. They graduated some other buildings. June 3rd, 1982, Sparrow Toy Company. 1,000-foot-long warehouse by almost 300 feet wide. Occupied, but empty at night. So unoccupied in a sense, right? That company went out of business in Boston. They moved to New Jersey. And they had imported toys, stuffed toys, and plastic. And they set the fire outside. It carried inside. They used a simple device, which back in the early 80s, I probably wouldn't tell the general public what the device was. But today, it was in the court case. It's in my book.
Yeah.
And the internet can tell you anything, right?
Right.
So their simple device was a brown paper lunch bag. Inside was a plastic Ziploc baggie with Coleman lantern fuel, maybe a pint, some tissue on top, and then as they place the device either up against siding outside or inside with readily available combustibles, they put the matchbook with the cigarette, and they interlace the cigarette, a lit cigarette in the matchbook, and when it burns down, ignites the match heads. Then it gets the paper bag and the tissues going, and then the plastic bag will evaporate, and you're off to the races. And they graduated even with that. They put that in tires, because tires, you guys are pretty young, but in my day, what'd you do with tires?
Just throw them out.
A lot of people threw them where they weren't supposed to be thrown.
Yeah.
In Boston, you had a lot of vacant lots, so they
Yeah.
threw them in vacant lots.
Right.
Well, today you go to Town Fair Tire or something, and they
Yeah.
you take $4 each tire or something. And they get rid of them
Yeah.
in a vacant lot.
Yeah.
But so they replace that device and get the tire going and really give a boost to their fire. So their favorite buildings, abandoned, yes, but they had gasoline shingles.
Oh.
And a lot of people don't even know what they are anymore. Gas shingles. Asphalt. It's the same shingles that are on the roof of most houses, many houses. In the 1940s, so many were built with that as siding all the way down to ground level. So you just place the device right again. I mean, you could put a lighter against them and get it going, and you're up to the rooftop, 3 stories in a matter of a few minutes.
Yeah, my district at work is we have a lot of still the older construction, and we have quite a few buildings with those, and they are impressive.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't take much, even a small outside fire with some extension to it, and you're gonna have a good fire.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's some things like in Burn Boston Burn, I talk about the story of these guys and about the investigators, but I also teach a little bit in there. Like, what is conspiracy? I in 2 pages, I tell the general public what conspiracy really is. And these were 9 conspirators. And they made violations. Every time they made a device was a violation of federal and state law. Every time they burned or attempted to burn was another violation of state and well, not always federal law. In federal law, it had to be a building affecting interstate commerce, like your favorite restaurant. The beef might come from Kansas. Heinz ketchup on the table comes from Pittsburgh. So if it burns down, the restaurant can't buy that anymore. So it affects interstate commerce. That's the type of buildings that we could bring to federal court, you know. So it was so interesting and so much work.
Yeah.
We had a Boston lieutenant, Steve McLaughlin, assigned to our group. He had a desk and a federal car, and he got cross-designated. He's the only person in history to have a Boston fire identification and an ATF identification. Okay? So he could work with us every day, but we would still know what's going on. We tried, working with Boston every day because the first fires initially were in Boston. And June 11th, 1982 was the busiest night in Boston Fire Department history. They set 9 or 10 fires, and at least 4 of them were multiple alarms. 2 9 alarms, a 6 and a 4, I think, that night. All on the same night. And there happened to be one other fire just happened.
Now, Wayne, I heard a rumor at one point what they would do when they started really getting smart with it. They would set a fire on one side of the district to pull companies to that side, and then when they knew companies were operating there and tied up, they would go to the other side of the district and set another fire there. So it would take longer for the outlining companies to come into that particular fire.
You're absolutely right. These guys, Greg Bemis grew up listening to Boston Fire Radio. He ended up learning, probably better than almost any firefighter, when Box came in, where it was. He knew where they were. So on top of what you just described, so they stole fireboxes. They were on utility poles and posts and here and there. And we even had call boxes back then. You could open it up and talk to fire alarm and say, I'm at Quincy and something street, and there's a fire here. And so think about this. You set a fire, I'll just make up a street, A and B street. You steal a firebox from B and C street. The firehouse is closed at C and D street. Okay? So that increases the burn time. In the middle of the night, most of these were in neighborhoods where hardly any people out in the middle of the night.
Right.
And you didn't have cell phones. And in most of those neighborhoods, you didn't have payphones. I mean, these are sleeping neighborhoods, residential and stuff too. And if you did, they're probably cut to begin with and vandalized. And so the extended time made that fire grow more and more. And they knew what they were doing by doing that. And they would set one over here and one over here. The night of Sparrow Toy Company, June 3rd, they set one right on Dot Ave, Dorchester Ave. And that went to 6 alarms, I think. And it was only half a mile away from the Sparrow Toy.
Wow.
So you had a 6 alarm, and then you had Sparrow went to 9 alarms. So you stressed the fire department beyond their limits.
Right, and I don't want to be misled on this. I think at one point, at least at that time, the highest Boston could really go was a 9th alarm. So if you're trying to operate with, a 6 and a 9th going on in the same time frame, trying to pull in, companies from Chelsea, Somerville, it's going to take some. And I know they were going through a lot of financial trouble at that time too with their staffing. So it's gonna take time for help to get into the city.
That June 11th, I have a slide that just shows a Norwood engine, Norwood, Mass. And Norwood's a good 15 miles southwest.
Yep.
And that was the first engine at the 10th fire of the night.
Wow.
It came from Norwood.
Wow.
It just shows how long the delay was.
Yeah.
And there's a couple stories in there about, these guys are going the wrong way because you didn't have GPS back then. And street maps trying to find a fire would be kind of rough. So people like Nat Whittemore was a cameraman for WBZ. He's a big part of my book because he helped with the first break on the case. And Nat tells a story where a couple engines are going the wrong way. He puts on this siren and stuff, and he turns them around and follow me, that type of thing.
So that actually leads into a question that I was kind of holding for you was, so obviously it's not like now, like when we go to a fire at work, we have everybody in the neighborhoods out taking pictures with the cell phones. So obviously, if you have, say, news or amateur photographers, were you able to get a hold of them for any of the footage and kind of see if, hey, maybe we're seeing the same person at every fire, that could be a clue?
Well, that's a good question. That's what photographers do a lot now. They scan the crowds and stuff, and it started back in the 80s doing that. We didn't really do that at the time, and Nat Whittemore did have some footage of people at some of the other fires. I have about 24 minutes of his footage that I use for my speaking events, and you will see people. But the problem with Boston at that time period, you had so many sparks that were running to the fires, they would be there all the time.
Right.
The same 50 to 100 people would race from fire to fire. So it didn't help a lot because being at a fire doesn't make you an arsonist. I say that multiple times in the book. Just because they did this and acted like idiots in the nighttime doesn't make them an arsonist.
Right.
And I'm not saying the sparks were. I'm just saying the way some people acted sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's funny in the book, and from like National Fire Radio brought it up about their vehicle they were using at the time was a retired, or was a ex-police car or something. That you guys gave it a name of like a Nerf cruiser.
Nerf cruisers,
Yeah.
make-believe cruisers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Each one of them, and that's important too. They drove black LTDs and Impalas, and black walls, and a whip antenna, and the reason they did that is, all of them wanted to be law enforcement or fire, but it also gave them cover at night. There's instances in the book where they go someplace and the cop would think, they're part of the arson squad or something like that. So even the locals, if you're riding around in Dorchester, Roxbury, Charlestown in the middle of the night in a neighborhood in that kind of car, they're just thinking it's unmarked cruiser.
Yeah. They're there for some reason, a purpose. And they had a license plate,
Oh,
arson.
Oh, yeah.
Was
So
like a-
yeah, that was Ray Norton, the firefighter himself. He had arson on his license plate.
Which, I mean, made the police and fire at the scenes just like, oh, they're part of the arson squad.
Exactly.
And that's kind of smart.
yeah, and especially now, it's not, how many houses have their own camera systems, ring doorbells, and not
Right.
like that back in the day.
Yeah.
So I call this the Mr. Flair case, and the newspaper and the press and the media, I don't like what they do. Every serial bank robber, every organized crime guy, Machine Gun Kelly, this and names. Greg Bemis, who went to at least 260 of the 264 building fires they set. He took the name Mr. Flair when they started talking about it in the paper that way. And he doesn't know. I've talked to him, and he does not know where the name came from, except from the press. And the Friday Night Firebug was the other nickname.
Firebug, yeah.
Because their initial fires, they had a pattern for sure. It was on Fridays that they were setting fires. And so the paper started putting out Friday Night Firebug. And they took that, and every time the press, they were happy about it. Hey, look, we're getting the coverage we wanted,
I feel like the public had to be pretty scared at some points. I mean, it was every Friday night, all this going on. I mean, you'd think they'd be, with having that car or whatever, I guess, them going to set an abandoned building on fire, it's like, you'd think maybe someone would have seen it, but then they have that car, that coverage, where it's just, maybe they're going to investigate something.
That's right. People were scared. I talked to some people even after I wrote the book and stuff. They moved their garbage cans away from the house, just in case somebody set their trash on fire. People, one of the parents would stay awake half the night, that type of thing. They were afraid.
Yeah.
And they weren't doing occupied houses.
Yeah.
We ended up catching a guy who was not acquainted with these people. He was setting fire because there was a bunch of fires in Jamaica Plain, JP. We did a surveillance. The very first night, we did it with Boston PD and fire and ATF. And the very first night, we caught Michael McDonald setting fires. The poor kid got paid on Thursdays and would go out and get soaked. And on his way home walking, he would it was trash night also. Trash was out by the street. Take the trash, stick it under shingles or under a porch, and just light it on fire. The bosses thought, "All right, you solved the case."
Yeah.
No, we knew right away that this was not the same. And they were occupied houses
Wow.
that he was
Oh.
setting.
And
Okay.
especially too, that's scary. So with a lot of those, getting the front porch going up pretty good.
And
It's gonna cut people off. It's gonna go right up the interior stairs, and oof.
Yeah, absolutely scary. The poor kid was, I interviewed him a couple weeks later. He was down in Bridgewater, which is where they're trying to detox him and stuff too. And there was nothing left. It was vacant. His head was vacant. He wasn't trying to be fresh or anything. He just had nothing left to say.
Wow.
And a couple years later, he killed himself. Yeah.
Now, like, out of all those fires these arsonists set, I know that you said there were a lot of abandoned buildings, but I think in the book I was also you saying they went through a bunch of dumpsters down like an alleyway.
Yeah.
There's like 100 dumpsters they set one night.
Yeah, initially they started with that, and they went to it only one other day while they would instead of doing buildings, they hit them again. But so the very first thing that they actually did was take some bricks and throw them through car windows to make the police tied up doing property vandalism instead of serious crime. That didn't get anything. They took a pellet gun and did 100 windows a night. That didn't do anything. Then they went to the dumpsters. Now, Back Street is the actual name of the street. So if you're coming inbound Storrow Drive, right along the Charles River with the Charles River on your left, and you got the expensive brownstones on your right, but the alleyway, Back Street, is right there between you and the brownstone, and that's where all the dumpsters are. And they would just take the matchbook and cigarette and throw it one after another, and they would pop right up. And some might take a little longer, but it'll still pop up at some point. And they went across the river to Charles, and they'd watch, and they'd listen to the radio because apparatus had to come from other neighborhoods who did not know what address the fire was at and did not know when they got there what address they were at, because it's in the back and
Yeah.
no numbers and stuff like that.
True.
So they laughed while they listened because they would listen to all this on their scanners. And they would just watch each fire pop up from across the river.
Wow.
Yeah. It's an expensive neighborhood. They expected the people there to start screaming, but it didn't really get any coverage. So that's why they went to buildings after that.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so this wasn't a fly-by-night of, hey, we just came up, sitting around the table with this. They had some good thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had regular meetings, and they actually had assignments. Okay, Bobby was a cop. Bobby, if you see a certain building that might fit, write it down. Greg would go around. Donald Stackpole owned a security company, and he started right in South Boston, so he would start picking places. Wayne Sandin was a cop for housing. He would find places. They would have lists, so they wouldn't have to spend a lot of time just running around at night saying, how's that look? How's this one look?
So very premeditated, where they'd have their plan, execute, and then be able to, go back to business as normal then.
Yes. Only on rare occasion, two guys would get together and just go riding around, just for the heck of it. Not intending to set a fire, but then the draw, because it became nightly entertainment for them. They became adrenaline junkies, and after a little while, they knew we were out there with Boston, and they would screw with us. And that's why they started heading outside the city. They went, set 2 in Quincy, raced right through the city at the middle of the night, as long as there's no construction, and went to Chelsea, Everett, Revere, and set 2 over there. So 4 in a night, but 2 totally different new neighborhoods.
But a couple alarm fires, not just
yeah,
outside. It was just
not single alarm
Yeah.
fires. A lot of them, yeah.
multiple alarms.
They went to Lowell. They went to Lawrence and set 3 mill buildings on fire in one night. But the big night was at Fitchburg, October of '82. They headed out Fitchburg, 40 miles from downtown. And who the heck goes to Fitchburg? You know, they set 4 major multiple alarm fires in one night. And I like to tease people, folks. Somebody almost died that night, and it wasn't by fire. And I'm not going to tell you how.
So they really were toying with you guys to throw you off, just making, that's a lot of thought goes into that of looking outside the city limits
Yeah.
to try to throw you guys off your tracks.
They definitely thought about it. They had meetings. They said, "Oh, it's getting a little too hot in Boston. Let's go outside the city, and let's screw with them." That's their words. Now, again, it's unusual in the book. You're going to see dialogue between the bad guys. That is true dialogue, and I can tell you why. Once we arrested Grabowski in particular and Bemis, I spent, with other investigators, 200 to 400 hours with both of those guys separately, prepping them for trials. We went to each fire scene, no matter what it looked like, abandoned lot, burned out Hulk, rehab building, and we would record who was with you, what did you do, that type of thing. And with all those hours, spending time with them, you learn their language. And then when Greg went to prison, he wrote 163 typed single-space pages, journal. And I have that journal. And I used that journal for their portion of the book. So a lot of what you're going to read is their actual words, thoughts, deeds, etc.
Did they have good record keeping? So if you brought them to a place and whether, like you said, vacant lot, rehab building, was it kind of like, I don't really remember this one, or were they pretty sharp with, oh no, we know exactly what we did?
Oh, that's a good question. Grabowski was the first one that we did that with, and he was a little here and there. He was probably at 100 fires anyway, but he didn't know everything exactly, and he was under stress that first night that he started confessing, and then we brought him to scenes, and stories might be different than the first night, which was on tape, so we had to work with what we had there too. But Greg, his mind, his memory was unbelievable. We had run sheets from Boston, and he'd look down, we were on a spree that night. He said we went from here to here to here to here to here. And he would tell you exactly the weather, the color of the building, the siding. He would tell you everything.
Wow.
His memory was fantastic. And when he testified in trial, he did an unbelievably good job. I mean, there's a lot of people, I talk in the group and I say to firefighters, how many have been injured here? And, you get some hands. How many had minor injuries? I don't want to make that doesn't sound serious. How many could have been serious? How many could have been dead? And, some of those people believe that Greg Bemis, Robert Grabowski should have been in for life, hung type of thing, and I don't blame them at all for that. I can agree with them on a lot of that, but you also have to live with the devil sometimes. I don't know when this case would have been solved if we didn't get that first confession. It took a lot of work. It took just under 2 years to get that first confession.
And working up to that confession, that one fire in particular sparked the interest of, it was on camera, of them acting silly.
Yes, being idiots in the night. Yes. We were so fortunate and lucky that we had a relationship with WBZ cameraman Nat Whittemore. Nat was a fire buff. He's a member of Boston Sparks, even to today. And he was getting paid by WBZ to go out and cover these fires every night. And he happened to be at Garrity Lumber too, because these guys burned Garrity Lumber in October of '82, and they went back. It's such a big place. They set another major fire, and I have the footage of that.
Wayne, is he the one, he has a YouTube channel? A lot of these fires are on there? Because I know the Spiro Toy, they have a very good video of that on YouTube.
I think Four Deuce,
Yes.
he's a different guy.
Okay.
Mr. Harrigan, he lives down in Plymouth, Mass area. I think they're going to use some of his footage for the documentary that they're doing on the book.
Yeah, a lot of great videos in
Yes.
between that time frame from
Yeah.
Boston. But yeah, just looking through your list of the fires before, like I know, may or may not have watched that one a couple times for the Connecticut Spark. I know.
Yeah.
But, yeah, a lot of good footage, a lot of good stuff, a lot of good pictures from that time.
So at Garrity 2, Nat comes around and he hears these guys. They made lots of noise at fires. They cheered for the fire, the home team. Who's the home team? The fire. Firefighters are the visitors. Okay, they would cheer and be rowdy. And in that particular night, Nat came around a pile of lumber, and they were on a pile across the way. And Bobby Grabluski, the Boston cop, had a green army jacket on. He went crossbody, draw from a shoulder holster, pulled his gun out, put it over his head, and just waved it around a couple of times like he's on a bucking bronco. And the other guy said, "He's filming you." And that's when he put it back. And they just sort of played like it was no big deal, you know. But that was shown to us, Boston Police, Fire, and ATF the next day. Not on TV, in the studio. And because of it, we said, okay, we found out that's Grabluski, that's Stackpole. So we knocked on Grabluski's door first because he was law enforcement. Law enforcement to law enforcement.
Yeah.
Maybe he knows something. Well, it ended up being a break in the case because we went to his apartment. And in his apartment, he had, sitting on the floor, was one of the stolen fireboxes. And my partner, Bill Murphy, a good Irish kid grew up in Boston and then south of Boston, puts on his trench coat as we're leaving. Bobby just said, you know, I always wanted to be a firefighter. I'm a buff, and we hang out, and he lied to us. Big deal. Yeah. What'd you expect? And Billy goes over and says, hey, my grandfather makes like bird cages or lamps out of these things. And he wanted to see what 4-digit number was on the front of it.
Yeah.
And it was box 1712. And we both lived south of Boston, and we were south of Boston interviewing Grabluski at 8:30 at night. We'd worked all day. We both went into Boston because under Billy's desk blotter on his desk was a mimeographed, you guys know it, a copy of the list of stolen boxes or missing boxes. And there were 14 of them that year. There's normally 1 or 2 missing, but these guys got a dozen anyway. And that was the first one that year, box 1712. And we wanted to see it. So we ended up getting a search warrant with the local search warrant because it's not a violation of ATF, federal law. Went back with Boston PD, Weymouth PD, where he lived. Boston didn't want to be there at all. We were let in by management because Bobby wasn't home. And guess what? The box was still sitting there the next day. We get no respect. You know, when when you're a criminal setting a bunch of fires and we're asking some questions in your house, and we see this, you might want to move it somewhere. No, no. But we got that, and Boston police said, okay, let's go. No, our warrant says we can look for anything related to these fires. We can look in drawers and everything if you got a diary or something, right? You know, no. So there was a little bit of disagreement there, and we didn't find anything else. And but they took Bobby off the street, and they took his gun away, and they put him up in what's called a turret, which is the dispatch. And they conducted the internal affairs investigation. Now, to tell you what kind of small world Boston is, Bill Murphy's father-in-law, excuse me, folks, was the head of internal affairs for Boston PD. And somebody else said to Billy, you're not welcome here anymore because you're going after one of ours. But they did an investigation. It was still going on 9 months later, a year later, for waving the gun and the stolen firebox. What kind of investigation are you not doing, you know? But we couldn't talk to him because he had an attorney for that and stuff like that. So that was the first break, though.
First break. Wow.
Because what I did with that, we knocked on some of the other doors. Wayne Sandin, another cop. He had 2 little kids. I had 2 little kids. Wayne, you know anything? He said, well, I don't. They did set a car on fire in Southie that was stripped, you know, a stolen car. It was just left abandoned. Okay. That didn't turn my head. And I kept a line of communication open with him, but he was a strange duck. And he said, oh, yeah, they burned another car, but it caught onto a building. Well, that's a little juicier.
Yeah.
But maybe Stackpole's going to burn some of his security cars for insurance because they have so many miles on them. I was waiting for that. We put a wire on them one night. The wire didn't work that night for some reason. You know?
Very.
And then he told us about one of the strangest things ever. These guys stole a brand new, black, unmarked cruiser from Natick Ford to update their own personal cruisers. And then dumped it in the Fort Point Channel, that body of water between downtown and Southie. And they dumped it in the ocean, basically. And Wayne Sandin told me that. And we recovered that with Boston dive teams.
Wow.
And that ended up being the second major break in the case. Now, that was in August we recovered it, but we still didn't do anything until this January of 1984. And that's when Grabluski confessed.
Wow.
Because now he's going to be charged, kicked off the force, charged with felony, go to prison. So he finally confessed.
Wow.
Wow. That's so anything recovered in the car when the dive team went down?
Not in his car. But then Greg Bemis dumped his on the East Boston side of the harbor. And so I think we recovered that because Grabluski told us about it. And there was a little bit, a few items in his car. But it started falling apart because Grabluski had an attorney again the day after we arrested him. He got arrested actually on January 13th, Friday the 13th. Okay, it was Friday the 13th, in the middle of the night. And he couldn't talk to us again because he had an attorney in federal court the next day. Until May, that was January, till May, because they tried to quash the confession, saying it was coerced or something. But we recorded, like guys, we might talk over lunch. That's how we talked to Bobby, and he just was relieved. He got it off his chest, and it was. We read him his rights and the whole thing, and it was just nice and easy. And you put that either on video. We didn't video. We should have, but we didn't. Back in '82, we didn't have easy access to video.
Yep.
But we did record it, and that recording, the judge heard it and said, his confession stands. So it was like the very next day, he decided to fully cooperate. And we wired him 17 times. 8 in person, 9 over the phone calls. And the information that we got from Sandon and Bemis in particular, and about some of the other guys, most of them did not go to trial.
Now, did you guys put any pressure on them by, say, going to the media, or if they did any, say they brought you in for an interview and they're like, oh, we have somebody that we think is a, involved or a suspicious person, just even if it wasn't necessarily true, but trying to put the heat on them, like if they saw that on the 6 o'clock news, knowing that, all right, I think they're on to us, and try to pressure them a little bit?
For the longest time, and you'll see through the book, you're going to see lack of investigation in a sense, because we investigated 260 plus fires, each one, as I described earlier, how you have to investigate them.
Yep.
And it took a lot of time. And we didn't get on to these guys until, so did they become suspects because he had the firebox? Because they're chasing fires all the time? Because they're being boisterous and rowdy at fires? Some of the fires quieted down after he took the polygraph and stuff like that. But you couldn't follow these guys. You couldn't put a lot of pressure on these guys because they were so law enforcement savvy. In the middle of the night, they'd spot a tail immediately, and you couldn't use the airplane in the city and stuff like that, and stuff. So,
And you guys were on roofs at times at night.
in the summer of '82, we spent about a month, a couple days a week for a month on roofs, and looking down in the neighborhood, the industrial neighborhood of Southie, and we had mobile teams, and we'd spot a car movement, and we'd tell the mobile team, go stop that car. Stop and frisk, basically, in a sense. Who are you? What are you doing in this area? And a lot of people would frown at that today, but there were no fires in Southie during that time period, but I'm not sure why. Maybe because Ray Norton, the firefighter, worked in headquarters. I don't know.
But the arson squad is out.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, by having that inside tip, if you knew, say there was talk or some heat coming down, where he could say, hey, lay low a little bit, and
He definitely told them that they're out there in full force tonight. I saw the 8 cars out there tonight, that type of thing.
that's incredible.
Yeah. So it was tiring. But as you look on it, it was fun in a sense, 200 firefighters got hurt during this time period, and some of them seriously. The East Street Barracks on October 2nd, 1982, when they came crashing down through the roof, 22 guys, and some never came back on the job.
But no one ever died throughout their...
Amazing, nobody ever died. It would have changed the dynamics of the whole case. I'm not sure how the confession, if we would have gotten the confessions, they wouldn't have gotten the same deals, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Originally Bemis's deal was 30 years for full cooperation, but after the 2 trials, they lowered it to 12 years or something. And Grablusi was the first one in the door, and he got 12 years. And he spent just over 10, because back then, 10 years, you were eligible for parole. It doesn't exist that way anymore. But you were eligible for parole back then, so he got out. But Stackpole did about 100 fires, but he went to trial, and he was nasty. When the guys came through the roof, he said, they shouldn't have freaking been up there to begin with. There was too many guys. It's their own fault, And he got a 40-year sentence. He did about 27, I think. And he's permanently housed in the Braintree, Massachusetts cemetery today. Died about 2 years after he got out, at age 55 or something. And the other guys got like 4 to 6. Some of them were much less involved, and only the 9th guy didn't set any fires or wasn't present at any fires. But he agreed to take Grabluski to Cincinnati, where he lived. He grew up across the street from Stackpole, but he had moved and got a real job in Cincinnati. And Stackpole asked him, could you house him out there and get him a job? And he agreed. He went to prison for that.
Wow.
Yeah, conspiracy.
Wow.
And that's the thing that's tough, for us as firefighters. We always say with vacant buildings, they just don't catch on fire on their own. So, and especially, now with it being cold out, squatters. So you still have to assume it's an occupied building, and not that it gets treated a little bit differently, but you need to treat it as there is somebody in there. There's a searchable space that we need to get in there. And, shocking that nobody, besides the guys that went through the roof, that nobody was killed at any of these fires. Or even the biggest thing too, especially with the economy of Boston in that time, no squatters in these places.
Right. The closest one, the only one that they relate in Greg's journal was one guy in alleyway behind when they were going to the back side. And they just, hey, get out of here, But otherwise, no. They thought about it after they ran into that guy, but they went into a lot of the buildings. I mean, about at least half of them, I say, they set the fires inside out of 264. Isn't that amazing that you could have a conspiracy of 8 arsonists for 2 years plus? Let's see, the first one was February of 82. The last one was May of 84. So over 2 years, but the investigation still went on longer. But over 2 years, hold a conspiracy together. I don't think you could do it today. Besides, like you say, cameras everywhere, doorbells, GPS, monitoring phones. I think social media. A lot of people today couldn't hold it together because they'd post something,
Yep.
Yeah.
But so you wouldn't have the same type of case.
Cameras,
Yeah.
all that.
But also, I mean, I'm not a fire marshal at all, but seeing obviously like the ones on my job, when we assist them with something, how, detailed they get with interviews, interviewing the occupants, anything suspicious, interviewing us, quote, suspicious fires I've been on, how detailed they get, show me exactly what door you forced, exactly what you saw, take me through, taking photos of everything, taking videos, having the state having the dogs come out where it's not, I'm assuming in the past, undetermined or accidental, where so much goes into it now. And I'm assuming probably this case led to a lot of the changes.
Do you guys know? I'm going to ask you a question. What was the first year of K9, Accelerant K9?
No idea.
Do you know where?
Also no idea.
Right here, Connecticut.
Really?
1986. And Massachusetts had this second one. And it was 1986. So we didn't have the use of K9 during this case either. We had these little sniffer electronic things that sucked, every time you got the nozzle in the ash, you had to clear it and clean it out, stuff like that. But it also, think about the device. So again, the tissue, the paper bag, you melt the plastic bag with the liquid fuel that volatilizes, and you burn a section of building inside or out, and firefighters come and hit someplace. They're usually well involved by the time they get there. I have so many pictures of well involved, fully involved. And some people use that term too loosely, but I can show you some fully involved. And so they can't actually, they're going to hit the origin area at the same time.
Right.
It's just as natural. But that device is gone. First of all, most of it burned up. Second, you're not going to find what's left of a cigarette or matches in that type of situation unless you got there in the incipient stage. And it was pretty rare. One or two burned out by themselves and never got discovered. That type of thing.
Right, especially too on those good fires. So the line's going to take the ceiling down. The truck's in there opening up, plaster and lath, everything on the floor, trying to clear that out and determine exactly where it started. And that much fire on arrival, it's going to be a lot harder to determine compared to, the one room, the kitchen cabinets. And
Exactly. They did have, Greg actually learned a device in a fire academy, that type of thing, and they had some fire science knowledge, not the best all the time, but they had some. they didn't understand a corner configuration versus center of a room versus side wall or something like that. But they did too good. 264 buildings.
In only 2 years, too.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And imagine how stressed Boston arson, especially because of the 264, I'd say 150 were in Boston. And never mind just having normal fires. But you have all these extras. And you have to investigate each one.
yeah. Also with their staffing shortage too at that time.
That's right. You know?
Yeah, because they were still going to other fires that these guys weren't setting.
That's right.
Like, it's wild to think about that.
Yeah, just like FDNY's Warriors
Yeah.
with everything, all the arson for profit and everything that was going on with that.
Right.
So I don't even know how I became the case agent. I honestly don't. Our group was 9 or 10 guys and a supervisor, and it could have been any of them could have been the case agent. In a sense, I honestly don't know from even my buddies that I talked to afterwards. I became the case agent and just with my life just fell, And since then, I wrote the book and other books, and it got Burn, Boston Burn has gotten picked up now for that documentary and a motion picture.
Yeah, can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah,
How it's reading the book and all that, it's like it seems like it's a movie, and it should be a movie because it's incredible.
It was so funny because people I don't know either hit me up on. I never had social media myself until I put it out for the books, and I don't do anything personal except my book stuff. Okay, and so people would hit up and say, "This should be a movie," or they'd send me an email. "This should be a movie." Or again, I picked the book up on Friday and I finished it by Monday, and I said, "How the heck did you do that? It's 470 pages, And so this is how life works for me. I mean, everything isn't always roses, but a screenwriter who grew up in Boston, his father worked at Logan for 30 years. He went out, got a job in Hollywood, went to a wedding in Phoenix, Arizona. It was an ATF agent. I'm talking to an agent there, that one who got married or another one. He said, "Hey, you're from Boston. You know this story?" "No." And so many people under 55 years old do not know this story at all. Okay? Boston firefighters don't know this story. So it's just got lost in history. And he went and bought the book and called me up through my website. You can get a hold of me through my website. And he said, "I'm coming out to visit family." He said, "Would you like to have lunch?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I love the book." I said, "Yeah, the writing sucked, but the story's good." So that's why I revised the book recently. But
That'll be coming out in a few weeks.
yep, the end of February, my new revised Burn, Boston Burn, which reads much better than the previous one. So we met for lunch, and he held his phone up at the end of lunch. He talked for 90% of the time. And, I can talk quite a bit, as you can see right here, but he talked more. He held up his phone and said, "I have 6 producers right here." He said, I guarantee I'm going to have somebody by next week interested in this story." He ended up with 2 of them. One grew up in East Boston, the other one grew up in Beverly, Mass. And 2 different companies. And they picked it up and they optioned the book. What they do is sort of rent the rights to the story. And initially, before COVID was the first agreement, they were going to do an 8-part miniseries. And he wrote like the cliff notes for each part. And it's really cool, for each one. But then things changed in Hollywood, and they decided the documentary and then the movie. The documentary, they don't need actors. I was out there back in October, and they filmed me for hours interviewing me. And, there'll be clips of me and clips of one of the arsonists and clips of other people and fires and stuff like that for the documentary. I don't know if they're going to do a 2-part, 1 hour, or what they're going to do for sure. But that still should be out here in 2026. The movie The next thing right now is getting a director on board. And once the director is on board, then he starts picking the actors. And I'm going to be executive producer for both. If you look at credits, there's 5 or 6 executive producers. And there's a variety of jobs and positions and things you do as EP. EP. Sounds impressive. But because I wrote the book and I have the inside story and, because I had contact with, I interviewed each one of these arsonists at some point. And locations, apparatus, I have my contacts with all the antique equipment, stuff like that. You're going to need some of that. There's a studio in Quincy, Mass., big one. It's like an old hangar or something. It's huge. And they filmed other movies there before, and they know it. Matter of fact, we had dinner here in Massachusetts with the guy who runs that place. So some of it's going to be there in that studio. Some of it's going to be live in Boston and Fitchburg. They have to do. Now, Fitchburg, I told you, somebody almost died that night. They're going to make it a little more exciting than it was, like Hollywood does. They're going to have a character playing me almost died that night.
Okay.
Okay, but it wasn't by fire. So it's going to be fun, and it's going to be my next career.
It's amazing.
And I'm
That's
going to
really awesome.
try to get my other books picked up too.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You have the other book,
Sure.
Bang Boom Burn.
Bang Boom Burn's my second book.
And when did that come out?
That was actually 2021.
Wait,
21. I'm already 5 years. That is 21 short stories, and if you do QR codes, it's actually a 20-second story. You can read it on your phone or whatever, your chat tablet or something. There's a couple gun cases. Again, talk about life. I had a 46 machine gun seizure, the largest M16 seizure in New England. And then I end up with the largest arson case. It was, maybe not in 2026, since other things have happened, but it was back in 84, 85. But, so I had a machine gun case, an undercover case where I was in Maine and did not know whether I was going to come home. I was all alone with an informant, and that was it, and the bad guys. And it turned bad. And then 2 bombing cases. One killed a Boston police officer in 91 and 1993 in New York State. A guy dating a woman, her family trying to break him up. So he sent 6 Christmas packages to her family members. And 4 of them exploded, killing 5 people. I had only a small part. I had the scene that killed 2 people. Was my scene. And another 14 arson cases of all types. We got a couple individual serial arson cases. Both of them are unique. We got reverse stings. You know what reverse stings are? You might have heard them in drug cases, or you might have heard Congress, they did reverse sting, and they're giving $50,000 to a congressman or something like that, in exchange for something. Well, in the fire world, we came across people that were arsonists for hire. For instance, one story in Vermont, he burned 4 dairy barns because back then the government was paying dairy farmers not to use their barn for 5 years because it was helping stabilize milk prices. Strange, but that's what they were doing. So they said, well, maybe I'll take the insurance money now when we burn it. So they hired the same guy. Northeast Kingdom is a tight community, And he was selling guns and drugs for an undercover state trooper in Vermont. And he said, you know anybody needs a building burned? And the trooper said, I'll get back to you. And he did. He got us. I was on the inside of the building that he was going to burn. That's a pitter-patter for your heart when he's coming through the door. Because we don't arrest them until they get through the door. Since he already does drugs, has guns, and you don't know how he's going to set your building on fire.
Jeez.
It's ratcheted up there.
Yeah.
So that's an area, and let's see. We ended up doing that 9 times in Boston, hiring guys to burn building. It's not entrapment, and it's explained in the book why it's not entrapment. Other cases, arson for profit, how tough they can be. We had husband and wife school teachers, never arrested before, white professionals, a dentist. I'm not an anti-dentite, if you know that line from Seinfeld. That one's from Seinfeld, anti-dentite. But we arrested him for burning a investment property. But trying to prove those things sometimes are very tough. So it's a lot of interesting stories. And the Worcester Warehouse is the last story in there. My chapter is meant to tear your heart out. I was there from the first night, and I was there for 10 days, and I'm one of 3 people that wrote the report for that fire. And it tore my heart out, and it still does. It weighs heavy on me when I talk about it at a seminar. And that chapter is meant to tear your heart out.
Wow. Well, excited to start reading that book. And you have one more book?
Yeah, I got one more fire-related book.
Yes.
I jumped to fiction. Flames of Secrecy. Too many lives and families have secrets, and my own was included in real life. And I converted that into fiction. And it's a serial arsonist murderer who only targets women because of mommy issues. And there's a couple really good twists in there, in that book. It was fun writing it, but you get to see the serial arsonist choose his target. You get to see him set the fire. You get to see the investigators do some of their work without making it boring for the general public. And you also get to see some profiling stuff, you know. Both, you can profile the investigator as well as the arsonist, you know, because we all have our issues at some point or another. And then I had nothing to do on a Saturday, when Flames was going through the last editing, and I wrote a children's book, The Mystery of the Missing Moon, based on something that happened with my granddaughter Eva. And she loved the moon. We gave her one of those crescent stuffed moons, and it went missing. And it's an investigative book. You know, it's still in my background, but it's an endearing book for children, grandparents, parents, and teaches kids not to give up. You know, so a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's really great.
Full circle. What got you into writing initially?
Oh, you know, way back in high school, I liked writing stuff. And then, of course, throughout a law enforcement career and almost 18 years in private side, reports. That got into my first initial book, too much like a report writing, you know. But I had thought about doing Burn, Boston, Burn, and that title came in my head instantly, you know, for a while. And I just didn't take the time until a Boston Globe reporter contacted us, and we had a little meeting with him, 4 of us, and he just sat there and listened to us talk for a couple hours. He didn't even take any notes. He said he's going to do a Sunday magazine article and then maybe a bigger project, like a book. I started typing. This is 2018. Last year, the Boston Red Sox won the title, 2018. I was typing every night. I had the Red Sox on about 140 games maybe in the background. I typed every night, even so I was working full time, till about 11 o'clock every night. And I started in January, and by Christmas, that first draft was done. And then it takes another 6 or 8 months of editing and revisions, and it still stunk. I'm slightly embarrassed by my first. I revised it once in 2023, and I still didn't make it as good as it should have been. I think what's coming out in a few weeks is something I can be proud of.
And you will have them in Allentown this year.
Say it again.
You will have them in Allentown this year?
I'm going to be at the Spring Melt in Allentown. Yep, I will have them for sure.
Shameless plug for everybody that goes to Allentown every year.
That is a heck of a crowd they have down there.
Yeah, that's where we first met.
Right, right. And yeah, I've got one event in Danvers. I've got a radio program coming up, somebody else's podcast coming up, and 3 libraries just booked me for August, July, and June. Yeah, so I've done over 120 speaking events relating to the books. If you need somebody, and this is a shameless plug too, I do teaching events to fire investigators all over the country. Last year I did New Mexico firefighters. This year I'm doing Ohio. I did Detroit or Michigan, but I've been down to Georgia, did fire investigators down there, and North and South Carolina. So I travel. And I have teaching points from Burn, Boston, Burn. That's good for all police, fire investigators, and first responders. And 12 teaching points from my second book. And I have great slides and video stuff from fires back then. So I do it all the time, and I love to do it. I love to share everything that I learned with the younger generation.
That's like we were talking off camera. I would love to have the podcast kind of sponsor an event either at the museum or see if we could talk to Joe McElroy's having it at the Connecticut Fire Academy. I think it'd be really great to have a speaking event there, and they have a good auditorium, of course, which would be perfect, I think. I don't know.
We may or may not know a couple people that work there.
Yeah.
Also, shameless plug.
I'd be happy to do it, you
That'd
know.
be great. It'd be really cool. So stay tuned for more of that, you know.
Yeah. So, Wayne, on social media, website, where can we find you?
BurnBostonBurn.com. All one word, Burn Boston Burn. If you want my email, I changed my work one is Author Wayne Miller, all one word, Author Wayne Miller at gmail.com. LinkedIn, it's Burn Boston Burn also. I just want to be known by that, since the name of the movie might be Burn Boston Burn too, I think. So, thank you guys for having me. This was
thank
fun.
you for coming on.
Yeah,
This was
thanks for
great.
coming on.
I did 99% of the talking, though, guys.